My brother destroyed my childhood, turned my life into a nightmare, betrayed me by secretly sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant, and now, after being disowned by our parents who left me a $2 million inheritance, he has the audacity to beg for my help. My brother turned my life into a nightmare, then got my wife pregnant. Now he seeks my assistance after our parents disowned him, leaving me their substantial $2 million inheritance. My younger brother, David, consistently harbored a deep-seated animosity toward me. If you imagine this originated from envy, you would be mistaken. He was the favored child, never me, leaving him no genuine cause for jealousy. To provide some background, our mother invariably indulged David. He was the family's darling, her golden child. She prepared his meals, handled his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his school assignments. I was expected to assist him purely because we were family, yet I never received the same consideration. I accepted this, as I was quite self-reliant. Perhaps it was partly my fault for consistently meeting his needs without any expectation of reciprocity. He never lent me a hand when I required it, only approaching me when he desired something. While I was a quiet, introverted child who found solace in studying and solitude, he was boisterous and unruly, much like our father. I also tend to be direct and honest, never sugarcoating truths. I suspect my mother might have developed a negative perception of me due to my candidness. This favoritism positioned David as the family's darling, a situation I didn't mind during our early years. However, issues surfaced when he began tormenting and ridiculing me for being different. He would tease me about my height and my eyeglasses. He would sneak into my room, read my private journal, then report its contents to my mother. When I confronted him or complained to our parents about his invasion of my privacy, they would simply laugh it off, dismissing it as inconsequential. He committed more egregious acts, like nearly shattering my glasses and maliciously adding unpleasant items to my food. Once, he even placed tiny stones in my cereal, though fortunately, I discovered them before they could damage my teeth. When I informed my mother, she trivialized it, saying, "This is how brothers bond." During our arguments, David invariably targeted my vulnerabilities with insults. We attended the same school, so he was aware I was being bullied by several other children. Instead of supporting me, he aligned himself with the tormentors, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey, and encouraging them to physically harm me, claiming I was just a big failure. On another occasion, during a dispute over something so trivial I can no longer recall it, he told me to kill myself. While I could typically brush off most insults, that one truly wounded me because I was grappling with my mental health at the time. I'm faring better now, but hearing my own brother wish for my demise was profoundly devastating. Given that Dad was frequently at work and Mom appeared largely indifferent, she even once scolded me, asserting it was my fault for irritating David. The situation progressively deteriorated during high school. A shocking incident occurred when David attempted to set my hair alight, and unbelievably, our mother defended him, claiming he was merely playing. Seriously, who behaves in such a manner? Thankfully, my father eventually sided with me, emphasizing the gravity of the situation. He even threatened to involve the police. This moment served as a crucial revelation for my brother, as he had never before faced any repercussions for his actions. He was genuinely stunned, and my dad made it unequivocally clear that enough was enough, and David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, Dad entered my room to speak with me. I had never anticipated his support, as he always highlighted how similar he and David were, which was true. Dad confessed that he had waited for years, hoping David would mature, but was slowly realizing that David was becoming an outright bully. Hearing this from my father was incredibly validating, and I nearly broke down in tears. I unburdened myself, recounting everything David had subjected me to over the years, even mentioning the school bullying. My dad was aghast at the extent of what I had endured. The following day, he spoke with the principal to ensure the bullies received a stern warning about severe consequences if their behavior persisted. That same evening, Dad enrolled me in MMA classes at our local gym, telling me I needed to man up and confront the bullies in my life. I admit that a studious kid like me attempting to learn to fight might have seemed amusing, but I was exceptionally focused. I managed my time diligently to balance my academics and daily workouts, and the MMA training entirely transformed my physique and my life. One day, David reverted to his old ways. He pilfered my pocket money, funds we received for contributing to chores, which I had been meticulously saving. David crept into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was preparing to cycle off with his friends. I demanded the return of my money, but David merely taunted me, suggesting all I could do was run to Daddy for help. I don't know what impulse overtook me, but I punched him in the face. He was stupefied, fell backward, and I retrieved my money from his pocket before pushing him back down. David began crying loudly, which was quite comical. However, my mother rushed out to assist him and ascertain what had transpired. Upon learning I had struck him, She was surprised and admonished me, stating I should be a better role model for David, who seemed to revel in seeing me scolded. My mother also complained to my father about my behavior, insisting I needed to be controlled. My dad grimly requested both of us to provide our accounts. I explained how David had stolen the money I had diligently earned and saved, while David attempted to justify it by claiming he needed the funds for a date and that, as his brother, I ought to help him. However, Dad informed David he was fortunate I merely punched him for stealing, as anyone else would have contacted the authorities. He continued, telling David he had no right to take others' possessions without their consent. David disliked this and threw a tantrum, likely hoping our mother would side with him, but Dad remained unwavering. When David realized he wouldn't be punished for being hit, he screamed how much he despised me and retreated to his room, locking himself inside. Following that incident, David began to distance himself from me. He had finally grasped that he could no longer physically bully me and that even Dad had ceased supporting his antics. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of parity between us. Though he could no longer physically harm me, he resorted to verbal insults when our parents were absent. His behavior worsened with age, becoming more irascible and short-tempered each year. When I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away, muttering disparaging remarks like nerd or loser under his breath. If he needed to communicate something, he would relay it through our mother instead of speaking to me directly. When I questioned her about David's reluctance to communicate, she would urge me to be more understanding. I couldn't discern if it was simply puberty or genuine animosity. Over time, dealing with his comments became insufferable, and I yearned to move out and escape his presence. I repeatedly asked my mother to intercede for a sit-down conversation to resolve our issues, but she always declined, stating she didn't want to get involved. When I sought her opinion on David's treatment of me, she would brush off the question. Eventually, I departed for my dream university, having earned a scholarship as a top student. My dad hosted a party for me, and even my mom appeared proud. However, David remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my accomplishments. The day I left for university was a blend of excitement for the future and profound relief to escape the toxic home environment. The constant apprehension of David's verbal attacks lifted, granting me a newfound sense of tranquility. The initial months at university were emancipating. I forged new friendships, enjoyed my courses, and began to construct a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere of my childhood. During my second year, I met Karen, who would become my wife, at a frat party through a mutual friend, and we immediately developed an affinity. Coming from a religious background, having children outside of marriage was frowned upon. However, when we discovered she was pregnant in our final year, we decided to marry promptly after graduation. Our wedding was a modest but joyous ceremony. Our parents were delighted for us, and we savored the celebration. In that moment, I believed Karen was the love of my life. I had always envisioned a monogamous relationship, one woman to come home to and share my life with. Despite other women expressing interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my ideal partner, and I never wanted to cause her pain. However, I later unveiled 2 instances of infidelity in our marriage. One was an intermittent affair with her married coworker that spanned several years, and the other a brief dalliance with an ex-boyfriend during a visit to her family. Some might deem me naive, and in retrospect, I cannot entirely disagree. Each time we separated for a period, I chose to forgive my wife. I didn't wish to raise our child in a broken home and genuinely believed we could overcome these obstacles. The affair with her coworker occurred when we were young, and I attributed it to youthful errors and poor judgment. For a while, things seemed to improve, though I could never fully trust her again. I made every effort to set aside my doubts, knowing that if I chose to reconcile, I had to genuinely strive for a fresh start. It had been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision to grant her another opportunity. Karen appeared to have changed, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. Yet, 3 months ago, my world was fragmented once more when she revealed she had been engaged in a long-term affair and suggested that our son might not be mine. Her words struck me like a physical blow. A devastating mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of her confession. In a daze, I managed to inquire why she had guarded such a significant secret and how she could have committed such a devastating act. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, as if detached from the pain she inflicted. Her vague responses left me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and agonizing moment, confronting the shattered trust and the profound uncertainty surrounding my own family. I continued to press Karen for the truth, convinced I deserved to know the biological father of the child I had raised since birth. Ultimately, she admitted it was David. My eyes widened in utter disbelief as I asked Karen to elaborate. She explained that she and David had become acquainted when I introduced her to my family, and she stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, typically reserved and distant with me, was unusually warm and polite towards her, which pleased me, as I wanted Karen to feel welcome. Karen, eager for acceptance into my family, spent considerable time with my mother whenever possible. She observed the rift between David and me and questioned me about it. I confided in her about our strained relationship, explaining that reconciliation seemed unlikely due to his unresolved animosity. Karen understood but began including David in our outings, hoping it might foster a bond. Whenever we planned to watch a movie, she invited David, and we watched whatever he selected. During this period, David and I exchanged a few words, a definite improvement compared to his usual silent treatment. I recall Karen and David spending time together, playing video games, but I never gave it much thought. Karen then told me that one day David opened up to her about his struggles following a recent breakup. Feeling vulnerable, he forged a friendship with her. She mentioned he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't present, and eventually, things escalated beyond her control. The image of my wife and brother sleeping together made me feel profoundly nauseated. Karen confessed she felt immense guilt afterward and ended things with him, which explained her abrupt decision to return home instead of spending New Year's with me. Although I attempted to persuade her to stay, she was adamant about leaving. When we reconvened at college after the holidays, she was her usual cheerful self, so I didn't question anything. 2 weeks later, we discovered she was pregnant. Karen admitted she didn't know if the child was mine or David's, and with no definitive way to prove paternity, she chose to remain with me, perceiving me as the more dependable brother. This, she explained, was the true reason for our marriage. My world felt utterly demolished. The son I cherished might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she had been seeing David recently, and she slowly nodded. She revealed they had always maintained contact because their chemistry was undeniable. They would clandestinely meet at hotels, deceiving me with excuses about working overtime. She admitted that half of her supposed business trips were actually romantic getaways with him. I questioned why she married me if she desired my brother, and Karen responded that she didn't want to be the one to initiate the divorce. She viewed me as a wonderful father to our son and opted to stay. In her own words, she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I informed Karen that while I appreciated her honesty, I was preparing to pack my belongings and leave. She began to weep, pleading for forgiveness, expecting me to shout. Instead, I calmly gathered my clothes. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for our relationship, arguing that mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized her emotional appeals were futile, she shifted tactics, asserting that our son would be negatively impacted by a divorce and that children should not be raised in broken homes. I gently reminded her that I might not even be the father, which caused her to cry more and accuse me of being cruel. It seemed she genuinely believed nothing could compel me to abandon the marriage, perhaps partly due to my past leniency. While I did love her, that affection now felt intrinsically tied to the illusion of having a son together and our shared history since college. Karen persisted in arguing it wasn't too late to mend things, but I found it impossible to believe her and had exhausted my patience. Trust was irrevocably broken, and her words felt hollow. Even if I forgave her, I could never erase the knowledge that she had been with my brother. I have always believed in forgiving errors, acknowledging our shared flaws, but this transgression exceeded all acceptable boundaries. I left her weeping on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The following day, I went directly to my parents and disclosed everything about my wife's affair with David, explaining how they had secretly been together for years. The incredulity on their faces was palpable. True to her nature, my mother initially attempted to defend David, adamantly insisting her son could never inflict such harm upon his own brother. Determined to expose the full truth, I requested my parents remain silent and allow me to call David in their presence. I instructed them to stay quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him believe it was a private conversation. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. However, when I informed him that Karen had confessed everything, he swiftly started blaming her, calling her characterless. He proclaimed it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, boasting that he was the better-looking brother. I firmly told him I would expose his actions to everyone. When David mocked me, stating no one would believe me because he was the golden child, I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for inadvertently confirming the truth, knowing our parents had heard every word. David fell silent, then spluttered, attempting to explain himself and salvage his image. My mother, still reeling from shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had once been so protective of her favored son, now grappling with a mix of profound disappointment and anger. In that highly charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. Now, the truth was laid bare, and the roles had reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his deplorable actions evident for all to witness. As David's words faltered, my father, typically reserved in his expressions, could no longer contain his disappointment. He asked me to hand him the phone and began to speak to David. "David," my father started, his voice heavy with disillusionment, "what you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions carry severe repercussions and have irreversibly shattered the trust we held in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and decency. What you've demonstrated today defies everything I've striven to teach you." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the utter lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the fundamental bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I bear some responsibility for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you are disowned from the college funds I established for you. You will have to determine how to pay your university fees independently. I will also cease funding your lifestyle. Do you believe it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my financial support." Throughout this, I maintained a composed demeanor. Although I initially yearned to scream at David, witnessing my dad deliver such a reprimand was the ultimate exoneration. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear he had drastically underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, continued to try and justify his actions, but my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's desperate attempts to explain away his behavior. Afterward, my mom approached me and embraced me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, there was an unspoken understanding and support amidst the family turmoil. She apologized for not believing me all this time. My 14-year-old self could never have conceived of this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. Following this, my dad assisted me in securing excellent legal counsel to divorce Karen. She and her lawyer attempted a contentious fight, demanding alimony since I earned more than her, but her infidelity weighed heavily in my favor. We also conducted a paternity test, and it was unequivocally confirmed that David was indeed the father of the child. The news was incredibly painful, even more devastating than discovering Karen's infidelity. I was furious that the son I had loved and raised was not biologically mine. However, I resolved to remain strong. Karen implored me to continue visiting my son, arguing he shouldn't be penalized for the situation, but I found it unbearable to see him. He reminded me too much of David, and I resented it. After my divorce was finalized, a profound sense of freedom washed over me as I moved into my own bachelor residence. It felt surreal to live alone, as I had married so young and never truly had the opportunity to experience independence. However, my naturally self-reliant nature allowed me to quickly adapt to my new lifestyle, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. 2 weeks ago, my dad called to inform me he was considering amending his will because he wished to bequeath nothing to David. My dad is incredibly resolute, and once he decided to cut David out of his life, he adhered to it. David attempted to reach out to our parents and even appeared at their doorstep, pleading for forgiveness, but they refused him entry. Even my mother, who usually succumbed to David's tantrums, seemed to be entirely done with him, though it must have been hardest for her. David never texted me to apologize for his actions, clearly indicating he felt no remorse. He was simply upset about being financially disowned by our parents. Dad told me he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring David wouldn't contest it later. He would leave David only $1. My eyes widened in shock, as my dad had worked diligently his entire life, and his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance totaled nearly $2 million. The sole condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue residing in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't object to this, as I wished to care for my mom in her twilight years. Somehow, David discovered this and, unable to contact our parents, called me yesterday, attempting to reconcile. He explained his struggles with college and that after Karen learned of the child's paternity, she had been persistently pestering him for child support. He claimed he had no money and was seeking part-time employment, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to speak to our family to start afresh, as he genuinely needed my assistance. I laughed in his face and informed him I was done with him. I reminded him that he should have considered the ramifications before sleeping with my wife and impregnating her. David argued that I was being unfair and that Karen also bore blame, to which I concurred. I reminded him that I had divorced her, making her his responsibility now. He should not be contacting me to complain about her or the child, as these were the inevitable consequences of his own actions. David began to raise his voice, but I interrupted, reminding him that he was no longer the favored child in the family, but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. In that moment, David began to weep, telling me how everyone, including our grandparents and extended relatives, had turned against him. While this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him our relationship was over and that he should never call me again, as I no longer considered him my brother. Since then, I've ruminated on that conversation. Despite my profound animosity for my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were children. I won't deny, it did sting a little to witness his vulnerability. So, I suppose I'm here to ask if I should intercede with our parents on his behalf, or if I would be remiss if I don't. Update 1. Hello everyone. Many of you have inquired why I am no longer in contact with my son, Henry, and some have even labeled me cruel. I must clarify that I am not comfortable raising another man's child. This is not a stepson scenario. I was led to believe Henry was my biological son, only to later discover he is actually my brother David's son. Naturally, this revelation caused deep pain, and I cried over it for days. The primary reason I desire no contact with Henry is that I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will inevitably find a way to re-enter my life, and I require my space. You may perceive me as cruel or selfish, but I cannot see him ever again, at least not for a very considerable period. Update 2. Most of you correctly surmised that it was my mother who divulged the information about my dad changing his will, prompting David to call me as a last resort to rectify things. I confronted her in front of my dad, and she broke down, pleading that I had punished David sufficiently and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly informed my mother that if she considered David's actions forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her because he could never forgive such a betrayal. This uncompromising threat silenced my mother. My dad made it unequivocally clear that if she ever communicated with David again, and we discovered it, she could pack her bags and depart. As I mentioned, my dad is incredibly resolute. Hopefully, my mother will learn from her errors. Update 3. Reddit. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has strengthened over the past few months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a close friend than merely a son. Although my mother misses David, she has maintained her distance from him. The last I heard about David was from my cousin, who mentioned David had been soliciting money from everyone and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't afford the tuition fees. He and Karen are cohabiting, and he has a part-time job as a mechanic. Apparently, they are raising Henry together, which I suppose is a positive development. I never discuss David with my parents, and they don't bring him up either. For everyone asking, I am doing quite well. I received a promotion at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has significantly improved. I haven't been dating anyone, as I feel I still require time and space to heal. I've been attending therapy, so we shall see how that progresses. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and activate the notification bell to stay informed about more compelling real-life narratives occurring around you.